I never thought a snowstorm in February would turn me into the most hated man in Pine Ridge Estates, but here we are. My name is Ryan Harrison, and I've lived in this supposedly quiet subdivision outside of Portland, Maine for the past 8 years. I bought my house back when the neighborhood was just starting to develop, when the HOA was still reasonable, and when people actually waved at each other, instead of measuring the height of your lawn with a ruler. The whole mess started on a Tuesday morning when I woke up to find 18 inches of fresh snow blanketing everything in sight. I'm talking about the kind of heavy, wet snow that makes your back ache just looking at it. I had already called into work, knowing there was no way I was making the commute into the city with roads like this. My plan was simple: drink my coffee, let the snow stop falling, then clear my driveway sometime before noon. What I didn't account for was Gloria Kennedy, the president of the Pine Ridge Estates HOA, and her obsessive need to control every aspect of our lives. I was on my second cup of coffee, still in my pajama pants and a hoodie, when I heard the aggressive pounding on my front door. Not a polite knock. Not a doorbell ring. Full-on pounding like the police were about to break the thing down. I opened it to find Gloria standing there in a pristine white parka that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her blonde hair sprayed into submission despite the wind, holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. "Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Are you aware that it is currently 9:43 in the morning?" I blinked at her. "Good morning to you too, Gloria." According to Section 7, Paragraph 4, Subsection B of the Pine Ridge Estates HOA Guidelines, all driveways must be cleared of snow within 6 hours of snowfall cessation. She tapped her pen against the clipboard. "The snow stopped at 7:15 this morning. That gives you until 1:15 this afternoon." "The snow stopped less than 3 hours ago," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "and I'm planning to clear it this afternoon." "Planning is not the same as doing, Mr. Harrison." She made a note on her clipboard. "I'm issuing you a formal warning. If your driveway is not cleared by the deadline, you will receive a fine of $250. I felt my jaw clench. "Gloria, it's still snowing a little. See?" I pointed at the light flurries still drifting down. "The storm isn't even completely done. The heavy snowfall has ceased. The guidelines are clear." She turned on her heel, her boots crunching in the snow. 1:15, Mr. Harrison. Don't make me come back." I watched her march back to her oversized SUV, which I noticed had an immaculately clear driveway. Of course it did. She probably had someone out there with a flamethrower the second the first flake fell. I closed the door harder than necessary and stood there, fuming. My neighbor Dave walked over 20 minutes later while I was angrily shoveling my driveway, still in my pajama pants, but now with boots and a heavy coat. He lived 3 houses down and was one of the few normal people left in this neighborhood. "She got to you too?" he asked, leaning on his own shovel. 6 hours from cessation of snowfall," I said, mimicking Gloria's prissy voice. "Like anyone has time to sit there with a stopwatch timing snowstorms." Dave laughed, but it was bitter. "She fined the Mitchells $300 last month because their Christmas lights were still up on December 26th. Said the guidelines clearly state all holiday decorations must be removed within 24 hours of the holiday." That's insane. Welcome to Pine Ridge Estates, where Gloria Kennedy makes the rules and we all suffer. He paused, looking at my driveway, then down the street. "Hey, you still have your plow attachment for your truck, right?" I did. When I first moved here, the previous owner of my house had plowed the small private road that led to the emergency access gate at the back of the neighborhood. It wasn't an official street, more like a long driveway that connected our subdivision to the main road through a back entrance. The development company had put it in for construction access, and it had stayed as a secondary exit. It was gated and locked, but residents had keys for emergencies. The fire department also had access. Yeah, why? Just wondering if you were still doing that. Clearing the emergency route, I mean. The truth was, I had been clearing it every major snowstorm for the past 5 years. The HOA never maintained it, claimed it wasn't their responsibility since it was technically a private easement that ran through my property and 2 others before connecting to the main road. The city wouldn't plow it because it was private. So I did it, mostly because I'm a decent human being and because in an actual emergency, that route could save lives. Our main entrance could get blocked easily, and that back gate had been used twice for ambulances when the front was jammed with traffic. I was planning on it after I finish here, I said. Dave nodded slowly. You're a better man than me, especially after Gloria just pulled that stunt. I shrugged and went back to shoveling, but his words stuck with me. Why was I plowing that route, out of the goodness of my heart? The HOA certainly didn't appreciate it. Gloria had never once thanked me. In fact, she'd complained last year that I'd left some snow berms that were unsightly near the gate. By 12:45, my driveway was completely clear. My back was screaming. My hands were blistered even through my gloves, and I was exhausted. I took a photo with my phone, time-stamped, just in case Gloria tried to claim otherwise. Then I went inside, made myself lunch, and thought about that emergency route sitting there under 2 feet of snow. At 1:30, Gloria knocked on my door again. I answered it with a sandwich in my hand. Your driveway is clear, she said, sounding almost disappointed. However, you missed the deadline by approximately 7 minutes based on the timestamp of your completion. I was done by 12:50, I said. I have photographic evidence. She sniffed. The guidelines state cleared, not photographed. Cleared means all snow removed from property, which includes the residual snow you tracked back onto the driveway when you walked across it to photograph it. I stared at her. You cannot be serious. I am issuing you a fine of $250 for non-compliance. You will receive formal notice in the mail within 3 business days. Have a good afternoon, Mr. Harrison. She walked away before I could respond. I stood there with my sandwich, watching her leave, and something inside me just snapped. Not in a violent way, but in a clarity way. I was done. I was done with Gloria Kennedy and her power-tripping nonsense. I was done being the nice guy who did extra work for a neighborhood that didn't appreciate it. I was done plowing that emergency route. The snow kept coming over the next 2 days. Not as heavy as Tuesday, but steady accumulation. By Thursday morning, the emergency route had about 30 inches of untouched snow on it. My truck with the plow attachment sat in my garage, and I left it there. Friday afternoon, I got the official notice from the HOA in the mail. $250, due within 30 days, for violation of snow removal guidelines. The letter was typed in formal business language and signed by Gloria Kennedy, HOA president. There was no appeals process mentioned, no way to contest it, just a demand for payment and a threat of additional fines and potential liens if I didn't comply. I sat at my kitchen table and did something I should have done years ago. I read the entire HOA guidelines document, all 47 pages of it. Most of it was the standard stuff about lawn maintenance, exterior paint colors, and noise ordinances. But buried in Section 12, I found something interesting. The HOA was required to maintain all common areas and easements within the subdivision. The emergency route was specifically mentioned as a common easement serving all residents. The HOA was responsible for its maintenance, including snow removal, within 24 hours of any snowfall exceeding 6 inches. They'd been in violation of their own guidelines for 5 years, while I'd been doing their job for free. I smiled and made a photocopy of that page, then wrote a formal letter to the HOA board explaining that I would no longer be maintaining the emergency access route, as it was the HOA's responsibility per their own guidelines. I sent it certified mail. The next snowstorm hit on Tuesday, 1 week after the first one. This time we got 14 inches overnight. I cleared my driveway by noon, well within the ridiculous 6-hour window. The emergency route, however, now had over 40 inches of accumulated snow blocking it completely. The gate was barely visible. Wednesday morning, Gloria was back at my door. Her face was red and not from the cold. "Mr. Harrison, the emergency access route has not been cleared," she said. "That's correct," I said pleasantly. "It's not my responsibility. You've been clearing it for years." "Out of the kindness of my heart, yes. But since the HOA has made it clear through their actions, specifically fining me for being a few minutes late on clearing my own driveway, that kindness is not valued here. I've decided to discontinue my volunteer work." I pulled out my copy of the guidelines. Section 12, Paragraph 2 clearly states the HOA is responsible for maintaining that easement. You should probably get someone on that. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. "You can't just stop. What if there's an emergency?" "Then I guess the fire department will have to use the front entrance. That's not my problem, Gloria. That's yours as HOA president." I started to close the door. "Have a nice day." "This is unacceptable. I'll fine you for this." I reopened the door. "Fine me for what?" "Not doing the HOA's job for them. Please, go ahead and try. I'd love to see how that holds up." She sputtered something I didn't quite catch and stomped away. I watched her slip slightly on her pristine walkway and barely catch herself. It brought me more satisfaction than it probably should have. Over the next few days, I waited to see what the HOA would do. The answer was nothing. The emergency route stayed buried. More snow fell on Friday, another 6 inches. I cleared my driveway. The route stayed buried. By the following Monday, we'd had 3 major snowfalls in 2 weeks, which was a lot even for Maine. The emergency route was completely impassable, with snow drifts reaching 4 feet in some places. My plow attachment could still handle it, but it would take a couple of hours of work. The HOA's problem, not mine. That Monday afternoon, I was working from home when I heard sirens. Lots of them. I looked out my window and saw fire trucks and an ambulance trying to navigate through our subdivision's main entrance. There was some kind of backup at the entrance. Cars parked poorly because of the snow berms, and the emergency vehicles were having trouble getting through. My stomach dropped a little. Then I remembered. Not my responsibility. The emergency vehicles eventually made it through after about 15 minutes of careful maneuvering. I later learned from Dave that old Mrs. Patterson had fallen and broken her hip. She was fine, got to the hospital safely, but those 15 minutes could have been critical in a different situation. That evening, Gloria sent out an email to all residents. The subject line was "Emergency Access Route," and the message was brief and pointed. Due to the negligence of one resident who has refused to maintain the emergency access route, our community's safety has been compromised. The HOA board is meeting to discuss consequences for this irresponsible behavior. We are also soliciting bids for commercial snow removal services, the cost of which will need to be distributed among all residents through a special assessment. My phone rang within 5 minutes. It was Dave. "Did you see Gloria's email?" he asked. "Just read it. She's blaming you for not plowing the route. That's ridiculous. It's literally the HOA's job." "I know. I sent them a letter explaining that last week. Half the neighborhood is up in arms. The Facebook group is going crazy." Pine Ridge Estates had a private Facebook group that I'd muted years ago because it was mostly people complaining about each other's landscaping. "Some people are defending you, but Gloria's got her supporters too." I sighed. "Let me guess, she's framing it like I'm being selfish, pretty much. She's saying you've always done it before and you're only stopping now to be petty after the fine. Which I got for following the rules, by the way. Just not fast enough for Her Majesty's liking." Dave laughed. "For what it's worth, I think you're right. She's been out of control for years. Maybe this will finally make the board do something." The next morning, I received a letter from the HOA's lawyer. It informed me that I was in violation of community standards and expectations, and that my refusal to maintain neighborhood safety features constituted negligence. They were demanding I immediately resume snow removal on the emergency route and pay for the cost of the special board meeting they'd had to call to discuss my behavior, which apparently came to $500. I took the letter to my own lawyer, Jennifer Martinez, who I'd used when buying my house. Her office was in downtown Portland, a renovated brick building near the Old Port District. She read the letter, read the HOA guidelines I'd brought, and actually laughed. "This is absurd," she said. "They have no legal ground to stand on. The emergency route is defined in their own documents as a common easement. That makes it their responsibility, period. The fact that you voluntarily maintained it for years doesn't create any legal obligation for you to continue. So I can just ignore this." Well, I wouldn't ignore it. Let me draft a response explaining the legal situation. We'll cite their own guidelines back at them and make it clear that any further harassment will result in legal action on your part. She leaned back in her chair. "How much do you want to push back on this?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, you could just stand your ground and wait for them to give up. Or you could go on the offensive. Countersue for harassment, demand they reimburse you for 5 years of snow removal services you provided, attorney's fees, that sort of thing." I thought about it. Part of me wanted to just let it go, but another part of me, the part that was tired of Gloria's tyranny, wanted to fight. "Let's start with the response letter and see how they react. I don't want to escalate unnecessarily, but I'm not backing down either." Jennifer nodded. "I'll have something drafted by tomorrow." The lawyer's letter went out on Thursday. By Friday afternoon, I had a response. The HOA was doubling down. Their lawyer argued that there was an implied easement by prescription, where my continued voluntary maintenance had created a reasonable expectation of ongoing service. It was legal nonsense, and even I could tell that. What bothered me more was the next part. The letter stated that the HOA was imposing an immediate fine of $1,000 for reckless endangerment of community residents through failure to maintain safety features. They were also threatening to place a lien on my property if I didn't pay. I forwarded it to Jennifer. She called me within an hour and she sounded angry. "This is harassment, plain and simple," she said. "They're just making up fines now. The guidelines don't support any of this. I think we need to file a lawsuit." "For what?" "Harassment, breach of fiduciary duty, violation of their own governing documents. The HOA board has a legal obligation to follow their own rules. They're not doing that. They're targeting you personally because you stood up to them." She paused. "This isn't just about you anymore, Ryan. If they can do this to you, they can do it to anyone in that neighborhood. Someone needs to stop them." She was right, but the thought of a lawsuit made me tired. Lawsuits were expensive, time-consuming, and stressful, but paying Gloria's made-up fines felt like betrayal of my own principles. "Do it," I said. "File the lawsuit." The next week was quiet, which should have been my first warning. The lawsuit was filed on Wednesday and the HOA was served on Thursday. I expected some kind of immediate reaction, but there was nothing. No angry emails, no letters, no Gloria pounding on my door, just silence. Then Saturday happened. I woke up to find my truck's tires slashed. All 4 of them, clean cuts that left them completely deflated. There was no note, no indication of who did it, but I had a pretty good idea. I filed a police report, and Officer Mike Thompson came out to take pictures and statements. "Any idea who might have done this?" he asked, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "I'm in a dispute with my HOA," I said. "Things have gotten pretty heated." He wrote that down. "The HOA president?" "What's her name?" "Gloria Kennedy. But I'm not saying she did it personally. I just think it might be related. We'll look into it. You got security cameras." I didn't, which I now realized was a mistake. "No, but I'm installing some today. The tires cost me $800 to replace." I added it to the list of damages in the lawsuit. I also installed 3 security cameras covering my driveway, front door, and the side of my house. They were the good kind that recorded to the cloud and sent alerts to my phone. The cameras paid for themselves 2 days later when they caught Gloria Kennedy walking through my yard at 2 in the morning. She didn't do anything, just walked around looking at my house, but it was creepy and definitely trespassing. I saved the footage. The following week, the HOA sent out another mass email announcing a special assessment of $200 per household to cover emergency snow removal services. The email specifically stated that this cost was necessitated by the refusal of one resident to continue providing volunteer services. They didn't name me, but everyone knew who they meant. My phone started ringing. Some neighbors were supportive, saying the HOA was out of line. Others were angry, demanding to know why I couldn't just keep plowing like I'd always done. One guy, Mark Stevens, who lived on Maple Court, actually came to my house and yelled at me on my front porch. $200 because you're being stubborn," he shouted. "Just plow the route, man. Stop being difficult." "The HOA is responsible for it," I said calmly, very aware that my security cameras were recording everything. "I'm not being difficult. I'm declining to do someone else's job for free, especially after they find me for not doing my own job fast enough." "You've been doing it for 5 years. Why stop now?" "Because I realized I was being taken advantage of. Would you work for free for someone who fined you for not working hard enough?" He didn't have a response to that, just stomped away muttering about lawyers and lawsuits and people who don't care about community. The snow kept falling, as it does in Maine in February. We had 2 more storms that week, and the emergency route became more and more buried. The HOA hadn't hired anyone to clear it yet, despite their emails about soliciting bids. I suspected they were trying to wait me out, hoping I'd cave and just do it to avoid the community pressure. I didn't cave. On March 2nd, exactly 3 weeks after I'd stopped plowing, we had another emergency. This time it was more serious. A house fire on Birch Lane, middle of the afternoon. The fire trucks couldn't get through the main entrance fast enough because there was a delivery truck blocking part of the road, and the emergency route was completely impassable. The house belonged to the Mitchells, the same couple who'd been fined for leaving their Christmas lights up. By the time the fire trucks navigated through, the fire had spread from the kitchen to the living room. Everyone got out safely, thank God, but the house sustained major damage. That evening, Gloria sent another email. This one was vicious. "Today's fire on Birch Lane could have been prevented if our emergency access route had been clear. The Mitchell family has lost much of their home because one selfish resident refuses to do his part for this community. This is unacceptable and potentially criminal. The board is consulting with legal counsel about pressing charges for reckless endangerment and property damage. I read it 3 times, my anger building with each pass. She was actually trying to blame me for the fire damage. Not the HOA's failure to maintain their own property, not the delivery truck that had blocked the main entrance, but me for not volunteering my time and equipment to fix their problem. My phone rang. It was Jennifer. "I saw the email," she said. "Tell me you didn't respond." "I haven't responded." "Good, don't. This is actually helpful for our case. She's making defamatory statements now, blaming you for something that was entirely the HOA's responsibility. We can add that to the lawsuit." She paused. "How are you holding up?" "I'm angry," I admitted. "The Mitchells are good people. Their house got damaged worse than it should have because the HOA was too cheap and stubborn to hire a snow removal service. And Gloria's trying to blame me. The court will see through it. We have documentation that you informed them of their responsibility. We have their own guidelines stating it's their job. This is on them, not you." The next morning, I had a different kind of visitor. 2 detectives from the Portland Police Department, Detectives Sarah Chen and Mark Rodriguez. They showed me their badges and asked if they could come in. "Are you Ryan Harrison?" Detective Chen asked. "I am. We're investigating the fire at the Mitchell residence. We understand you have a plow attachment for your truck and have historically maintained the emergency access route for this subdivision." I invited them in and explained the entire situation, starting with Gloria's fine, my decision to stop plowing, my letter to the HOA citing their own guidelines, and all the escalation that had followed. I showed them the HOA guidelines, Jennifer's letters, and the lawsuit we'd filed. Detective Rodriguez took notes while Detective Chen asked questions. They were professional and neutral, not accusatory. "So the HOA was aware of their responsibility to maintain the route?" Detective Chen asked. "Yes. I sent them formal notice 3 weeks ago. They acknowledged it by trying to fine me for not doing it. And you have no legal obligation to plow that route." "None." My lawyer confirmed it. "The route is defined in the HOA documents as a common easement maintained by the association, not by individual residents." They asked a few more questions, looked at my documentation, and finally stood to leave. "We appreciate your cooperation, Mr. Harrison," Detective Rodriguez said. "For what it's worth, this doesn't sound like a criminal matter. It sounds like a civil dispute between you and your HOA." After they left, I felt some relief, but I knew this wasn't over. Gloria wasn't going to back down just because the police weren't going to arrest me. I was right. That afternoon, I received a notice that the HOA was holding an emergency meeting that evening to discuss the ongoing safety crisis caused by Ryan Harrison's refusal to maintain community infrastructure. All residents were invited to attend. I called Jennifer. "Should I go?" "Absolutely. And I'm coming with you. Don't say anything without checking with me first, but we need to be there to defend against whatever nonsense they're planning." The meeting was held at the community center, a small building near the subdivision's entrance that was mostly used for the annual holiday party. When Jennifer and I arrived at 7 o'clock, the parking lot was full. It seemed like half the neighborhood had shown up. Inside, chairs were arranged in rows facing a table where Gloria sat with the other board members. Treasurer Mark Stevens, yes, the same guy who'd yelled at me. Secretary Patricia Wung, and 2 at-large members I didn't know well, James Tucker and Linda Martinez, no relation to my lawyer. Gloria called the meeting to order by banging a gavel, which felt overly dramatic. Thank you all for coming. We're here tonight to address the safety crisis that has plagued our community for the past 3 weeks due to the negligence of Ryan Harrison. I felt Jennifer's hand on my arm, keeping me seated and quiet. Mr. Harrison has refused to continue maintaining the emergency access route despite years of doing so. This route is critical for emergency services, as we tragically saw with this week's fire at the Mitchell home. The board proposes the following actions. First, a formal censure of Mr. Harrison for endangering the community. Second, a fine of $5,000 for each week he continues to refuse to clear the route. Third, authorization for the board to hire a snow removal service and bill Mr. Harrison directly for the costs. There was murmuring in the crowd. Some people were nodding. Others looked confused. Jennifer stood up. "Excuse me, I'm Jennifer Martinez, Mr. Harrison's attorney. May I speak?" Gloria looked annoyed but nodded. "You may address the board. Thank you. I want to make sure everyone here understands the actual facts of this situation." Jennifer pulled out copies of the HOA guidelines and held them up. According to Section 12, Paragraph 2 of your own governing documents, the emergency access route is defined as a common easement maintained by the HOA. Not by Mr. Harrison, not by any individual resident, by the HOA board. She walked forward and placed copies on the board's table. Mr. Harrison volunteered to maintain that route for 5 years out of generosity. He was never obligated to do so. When the board chose to fine him $250 for clearing his own driveway a few minutes late, he decided he was done volunteering his time and equipment for an ungrateful board. That is his right. Gloria's face was turning red. He has a moral obligation to this community. Moral obligations don't create legal ones, Miss Kennedy. The legal obligation here rests entirely with the HOA board. You have known about this responsibility for 3 weeks. Instead of hiring a snow removal service as you should have, you've spent that time harassing my client, sending defamatory emails, and making up fines that have no basis in your own guidelines. Jennifer's voice was sharp now. This board is in breach of its fiduciary duty to the residents of this community. You're so focused on punishing Mr. Harrison for standing up to you that you've forgotten your actual responsibilities. Patricia Wong spoke up for the first time. "We've been getting bids for snow removal services." "Have you hired anyone?" Jennifer asked. "The quotes were very expensive. More expensive than the lawsuit you're facing. More expensive than the potential liability if someone gets hurt or dies because emergency services can't access this subdivision." Jennifer let that hang in the air. "Mr. Harrison has filed a lawsuit against this board for harassment and breach of duty. I strongly suggest you consult with your own attorney before taking any further action against him." The room erupted in conversation. People were talking over each other, some angry, some confused. Dave stood up from the back. "I've got a question for the board," he said loudly. "If it's the HOA's responsibility to maintain that route, why have we been letting Ryan do it for free all these years?" Gloria banged her gavel. "That's not relevant to tonight's discussion." "It's totally relevant." Another voice called out. I recognized Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who'd broken her hip. She was on crutches but standing. "This young man has been saving the HOA money for years by doing work he didn't have to do, and you're trying to punish him for it. That's shameful." More voices joined in. The meeting was descending into chaos. Gloria kept banging her gavel, but people weren't listening anymore. Residents were arguing with each other with the board, pulling out phones to look up the guidelines themselves. Finally, James Tucker, one of the at-large board members, stood up. "I move that we table this discussion until our next regular meeting. We clearly need to consult with our attorney and review the governing documents more carefully. Second, Linda Martinez said quickly. Gloria looked like she wanted to argue, but she was outvoted. Fine. This meeting is adjourned, but this isn't over, Mr. Harrison. Jennifer and I left quickly, avoiding the crowds of neighbors who wanted to talk. In the parking lot, she turned to me with a small smile. That went well, she said, did it? Gloria looked ready to murder me. Gloria looked cornered. That's different. The board is fracturing. Did you see Tucker and Martinez? They're not on her side anymore. They're realizing the legal exposure they're facing. She unlocked her car. I expect we'll hear from the HOA's attorney within a few days. They're going to want to settle. She was half right. 2 days later, I received a letter from a different law firm representing the HOA. It was a cease and desist letter demanding I drop my lawsuit and threatening to counter-sue for defamation and interference with community governance. Jennifer's response was swift and brutal. She filed an amended complaint, adding the defamatory email about the fire, the illegal fines, and Gloria's trespassing, complete with video evidence. She also filed a motion for a temporary restraining order to prevent the HOA from issuing any more fines or taking any action against me while the lawsuit proceeded. Things got quiet for about a week. I kept clearing my own driveway. The emergency route stayed buried under several feet of snow. And then something unexpected happened. I came home from actual work. I'd gone back to the office a few days a week to find a commercial snow removal truck clearing the emergency route. A real professional operation with a large plow truck and a crew. I stopped and talked to the driver. HOA finally hired you guys? I asked. Nope, the driver said, a weathered guy in his 50s named Tom. Group of residents got together and hired us. They're splitting the cost themselves rather than wait for the board to pull their heads out of their butts. I later learned that Dave had organized it. 20 families had chipped in $50 each to hire the service for the rest of winter. It warmed my heart more than I wanted to admit. The neighborhood wasn't the problem. Gloria was. The legal process moved slowly, as legal processes do. We had hearings, depositions, and a mountain of paperwork. The HOA's attorney tried to get the case dismissed, arguing it was a minor dispute that didn't warrant court involvement. The judge disagreed. In late April, after most of the snow had melted and life had returned to some normalcy, we finally went to mediation. The HOA's insurance company had gotten involved, and they wanted the whole thing to go away. Gloria attended with the board's attorney. She looked tired and angry, her perfectly styled hair not quite as perfect as usual. The mediator, a calm woman in her 60s named Susan Porter, laid out the situation clearly. The HOA had violated their own governing documents, harassed me, made defamatory statements, and failed in their fiduciary duty to residents. My case was strong, very strong. What would it take to resolve this? Susan asked me and Jennifer. Jennifer had prepared a list. First, all fines against Mr. Harrison dropped and a written apology from the board. Second, reimbursement for his legal fees. Third, reimbursement for 5 years of snow removal services he provided at fair market rate. Fourth, written acknowledgement from the board that they are responsible for maintaining the emergency access route. Fifth, Gloria Kennedy's resignation as HOA president. Gloria made a strangled noise. Absolutely not. I'm not resigning. Then we'll see you in court, Jennifer said pleasantly. And I'll add punitive damages to our claim. The evidence of your personal vendetta against my client is overwhelming, Miss Kennedy. A jury isn't going to like you very much. The HOA's attorney looked pained. He asked for a private caucus with his clients. They left the room for 45 minutes. When they came back, Gloria's face was like stone. "We agree to drop all fines and issue a written apology," the attorney said. "We'll reimburse legal fees and provide written acknowledgement of responsibility for the emergency route. We'll pay fair market rate for 3 years of snow removal services, not 5. "And Miss Kennedy's resignation?" Jennifer asked. "Miss Kennedy will agree not to seek re-election at the next board election in June. It wasn't everything, but it was close." I looked at Jennifer, and she nodded slightly. "It was a good deal." "Agreed," I said. The settlement was formalized over the next 2 weeks. I received a check for $12,000 covering my attorney's fees and 3 years of snow removal at market rate. The HOA sent a formal letter to all residents acknowledging their responsibility for the emergency route and apologizing for the miscommunication and confusion regarding the matter. They carefully avoided admitting fault for the fire damage, but the Mitchells' insurance was handling that anyway. Gloria didn't resign immediately, but she became noticeably quieter. The emails stopped. The harassment stopped. She avoided me entirely, which was fine by me. In June, there was an HOA board election. Gloria didn't run for re-election as promised. Dave ran for president and won easily. Patricia Wung stayed on as secretary. Mark Stevens was voted out entirely, replaced by Mrs. Patterson, who ran on a platform of common sense and common decency. The first thing the new board did was hire a professional management company to handle HOA operations, taking much of the power out of any one person's hands. The second thing they did was revise the snow removal guidelines to be more reasonable. The third thing was to establish an appeals process for fines. I attended the first meeting under the new board. Dave called it to order without a gavel and with a lot less drama than Gloria's meetings. When we got to new business, he looked directly at me. "I want to formally thank Ryan Harrison for his years of volunteer service maintaining our emergency access route," he said. "Ryan, the board would like to offer you a contract to continue that service at fair market rate going forward if you're interested." I thought about it. The vindictive part of me wanted to say no, wanted to let them hire someone else and be done with it. But the practical part of me remembered why I'd started plowing that route in the first place. Because it was the right thing to do. Because in an emergency, it could save lives. And because now I'd actually be compensated fairly for my work. "I'd be happy to," I said. The neighborhood settled into a new normal over the summer. Gloria moved away in August, selling her house and relocating somewhere in Florida. I heard rumors she'd become president of that HOA too, but I didn't verify them. It wasn't my problem anymore. The emergency route contract paid me $300 per plowing event, which was fair compensation for 2 to 3 hours of work and wear on my truck. The professional service Dave's group had hired also had a contract as backup for when I was unavailable. It was a good system, a reasonable system. In September, almost exactly 7 months after the whole thing started, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Gloria, postmarked from Naples, Florida. Against my better judgment, I opened it. The letter was short, handwritten, and surprising. "Mr. Harrison, I'm writing to apologize. Not the formal apology the lawyers wrote, but a real one. You were right. I was on a power trip, and I let my ego get in the way of common sense and basic decency. I spent so much time trying to enforce rules that I forgot why we have an HOA in the first place, to make the neighborhood better for everyone, not to control everyone. I made your life miserable because you stood up to me, and that was wrong. I'm working on being a better person. I hope you can forgive me someday. The neighborhood is lucky to have someone like you. Gloria Kennedy." I read it twice, then put it in a drawer. I wasn't sure I forgave her, not entirely, but I appreciated the gesture. It took courage to admit you were wrong, especially for someone like Gloria who'd built her entire identity around always being right. Life moved on. Winter came again, and I plowed the emergency route after each snowstorm, properly compensated this time. The new HOA board was reasonable and functional. Neighbors waved again instead of measuring each other's lawns with rulers. I never did get back the year of my life that Gloria's vendetta had consumed, but I got something better. Proof that standing up for yourself, even when it's hard and lonely and everyone seems against you, is worth it. Bullies, even ones with clipboards and HOA authority, only win if you let them. And I definitely didn't let her win. The story could have ended there, neat and tidy, but life is rarely that simple. In November, about a year after the whole mess started, I was plowing the emergency route after an early season snowstorm when I noticed something odd. The gate that provided access to the main road was damaged, hanging at an angle. I got out to investigate and found that the lock had been cut cleanly with bolt cutters. I called the police immediately. Officer Thompson came out again, examined the gate, and took a report. "Any idea who would want to vandalize this?" he asked. "Not anymore," I said honestly. "Gloria moved away and things have been quiet." He made notes and said they'd increase patrols in the area. I reported it to the HOA board, and Dave ordered a new gate and lock installed within 2 days. I thought it was just random vandalism, kids maybe, and forgot about it. Then in December it happened again. Different gate, same method. Clean cut through the lock. This time I checked my security cameras, but they didn't cover that far down the route. The HOA installed cameras at the gate. The third time the gate was cut, in early January, we got footage. And that's when everything changed again. The footage showed a man in dark clothes and a ski mask using bolt cutters on the lock at 2:30 in the morning. But what caught my attention was the vehicle parked nearby, a white SUV with a distinctive dent in the rear panel. I recognized that SUV. It belonged to Mark Stevens, the former HOA board member who'd been voted out. We called the police with the footage. Detective Chen came back out, reviewed the video, and ran the plates. It was definitely Stevens' vehicle. They brought him in for questioning. Initially, Stevens denied everything, claimed his vehicle had been stolen those nights, filed a false police report and everything. But the detectives didn't buy it. They got a warrant for his phone records and found something disturbing. Stevens had been communicating with Gloria Kennedy extensively. Even after she'd moved to Florida, they'd been texting and calling regularly, and the content of those messages was damning. "Make Harrison's life hell," one text from Gloria read. "He ruined everything. He needs to pay." The messages detailed a campaign of harassment, vandalized the gate to make it seem like having it open was a security risk, then blame me for not maintaining it properly. Escalate to more serious vandalism if needed. The goal was to get me removed from my snow removal contract, or better yet, run me out of the neighborhood entirely. Stevens was arrested and charged with criminal mischief and conspiracy. When faced with the evidence, he confessed and agreed to cooperate. He showed the police more messages, including ones where Gloria had offered to pay him $5,000 if he could make Harrison leave. The police contacted authorities in Florida. Gloria was brought in for questioning and ultimately charged with conspiracy to commit criminal mischief and solicitation of harassment. She fought extradition initially, but eventually agreed to return to Maine to face the charges. The trial was in March, almost 2 years after the original snowstorm that started everything. I had to testify, which was uncomfortable and stressful, but necessary. The prosecutor laid out the timeline clearly. Gloria's initial power trip, my resistance, her escalation, the settlement that forced her out, and then her revenge plot from Florida using Stevens as her proxy. The defense tried to argue it was just angry venting, that Gloria never seriously intended for Stevens to do anything. But the money transfer showed otherwise. Gloria had sent Stevens $2,000 via payment app 2 days after the first gate was cut, with the note, "First installment." The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing came 2 months later. Stevens got 6 months in county jail and 3 years probation. Gloria got a year in jail, 3 years probation, and a permanent restraining order prohibiting her from contacting me or coming within 1,000 feet of Pine Ridge Estates. Standing in that courtroom, watching Gloria Kennedy be led away in handcuffs, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Satisfaction, yes. Vindication, definitely, but also something like sadness. This woman had destroyed her own life over a petty power trip that started with snow removal. She'd gone from HOA president to convicted criminal because she couldn't handle someone saying no to her. After the sentencing, Detective Chen approached me in the hallway. "I know this has been a long ordeal," she said. "But you did the right thing standing up to her. People like Kennedy, they need someone to push back or they just keep escalating." "I never wanted it to go this far," I said. "Neither did she probably, but that's what happens when you can't let go of control." She shook my hand. "Take care, Mr. Harrison. I hope we don't see each other professionally again." "Same here, Detective." Life finally, truly settled down after that. The new HOA board was functional and drama-free. Dave served 2 years as president and then passed the role to someone else, establishing a precedent of term limits. I continued my snow removal contract through 3 more winters without incident. The emergency route was used twice in that time, once for an ambulance and once when the main entrance was blocked by a fallen tree. Both times, the route was clear and accessible because I'd done my job. I never heard from Gloria again after her sentencing. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she'd served her full year because she wasn't eligible for early release, and that she'd moved back to Florida after probation allowed her to leave the state. I hoped she'd found some peace, some way to be happy without needing to control everything around her. As for me, I learned some valuable lessons through the whole mess. I learned that standing up for yourself is important, even when it's uncomfortable. I learned that reasonable people will see reason eventually, and unreasonable people will destroy themselves trying to win unwinnable battles. I learned that community matters, that neighbors like Dave and Mrs. Patterson and the others who supported me made all the difference. Most importantly, I learned that sometimes doing the right thing means declining to do something you've always done when it's no longer appreciated or fair. Volunteer work is wonderful when it's voluntary. The moment someone tries to compel you to demand it, to punish you for not doing it, it stops being volunteerism and starts being exploitation. The snow still falls every winter in Pine Ridge Estates. I still plow the emergency route, properly compensated now. My driveway still gets cleared within a reasonable time frame, and no one measures it with a stopwatch anymore. The neighborhood exists as it should, a place where people live their lives with basic rules that make sense and reasonable enforcement that doesn't destroy lives. And somewhere in Florida, I imagine Gloria Kennedy looks at snow on television and remembers the winter she tried to fine a man for not plowing fast enough and ended up in jail for it. I hope the irony isn't lost on her. I hope she's learned something. But mostly, I just hope she's found a way to live without needing to control everyone around her. As for me, I'm just glad it's over. I'm glad my life returned to normal. I'm glad the emergency route is maintained properly. And I'm especially glad that I stood my ground when it mattered, even though it was hard, even though it took 2 years to fully resolve, even though it ended with court cases and criminal charges. Because in the end, it wasn't really about snow removal at all. It was about dignity, respect, and refusing to be bullied by someone who mistook authority for power and rules for righteousness. And that's a battle worth fighting, no matter how long it takes or how much snow falls while you're fighting it. The neighborhood is peaceful now, the kind of peaceful it should have always been. Kids play in the streets during summer, people chat while walking their dogs, and the HOA exists as a boring administrative necessity rather than a source of constant drama and fear. It's exactly what a neighborhood should be. And when the snow falls, the emergency route gets cleared professionally and promptly, ready for whatever crisis might come. Because that's what responsible community management looks like, not power trips and arbitrary fines and vendettas that consume lives and end in courtrooms. I still live in Pine Ridge Estates, in the same house I bought 8 years ago. I still have the plow attachment for my truck. And I still clear that emergency route every snowstorm, but now I do it as a contractor, not as a volunteer being taken advantage of. That distinction matters more than I ever realized before Gloria Kennedy knocked on my door that snowy Tuesday morning and started a chain of events that would ultimately land her in jail. Some people never learn that you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. Gloria learned it too late and the hard way. I just hope the next HOA president she encounters in Florida learned it early enough to avoid making the same mistakes. The snow will fall, driveways will need clearing, and communities will need managing. But none of it requires the kind of tyrannical control that Gloria craved and that ultimately destroyed her life. My life is quiet now, blessedly quiet, the way it should have been all along. And every time I hook up my plow attachment and clear that emergency route, I remember why I started doing it in the first place. Because it was the right thing to do, because it helped people, and because community service should be about serving the community, not about one person's ego. Gloria Kennedy taught me a lot, though not in the way she intended. She taught me about standing firm, about knowing your rights, about the difference between rules that serve people and rules that control them. She taught me that bullies come in all forms, including well-dressed HOA presidents with clipboards and lawyer-drafted letters. And she taught me that justice, while slow, does eventually arrive for those patient and principled enough to wait for it. The emergency route is clear. The neighborhood is safe, and I sleep well at night knowing I did the right thing, even when it was the hard thing. That's worth more than any amount of money, any settlement, any victory in court. It's worth the peace of mind that comes from knowing you stood up when it mattered and didn't back down when someone tried to make you. And if Gloria Kennedy ever thinks about Pine Ridge Estates from her new life in Florida, I hope she remembers that and learns from it. But whether she does or not, I've moved on. The neighborhood has moved on. And life continues, snowstorm after snowstorm, season after season, with the emergency route clear and ready, just as it should be.